Terima kasih Anda kembali bersama kami di CNN Indonesia Business. Kemajuan teknologi menjadi kunci dari pertumbuhan ekonomi. Istilah baru Fintech atau Financial Teknologi akan memegang peranan penting untuk mendorong perekonomian Indonesia. Simak wawancara Pangeran Punce dengan Vivek Pathak, Direktur International Finance Coorporation dari World Bank Grup berikut ini.
So, Mr. Vivek, thank you so much for joining with CNN Indonesia. So, if you talk about the financial technology, how big is the market here in Indonesia?
So the market is huge, and I'll just share a few statistics with you. MSMEs are the backbone of any economy, they say, and the total workforce that MSMEs employ in Indonesia are close to 90%, and they contribute more than 60% to the entire GDP of the country. And to me, the entire MSME sector can be served by technology, can be served through smartphones. Then if you add to that the consumer banking segment or the consumer loans, there you're going to have a much bigger market. And just to also share some numbers, a lot of this is actually dependent on the penetration of the internet and use of phones. And Indonesia, I'm told, the penetration of SIM cards is at about 150% of the population. There are, I'm told, close to 113 or 115 million users of smartphones, and internet penetration is at north of 50%. But clearly that needs to improve if you need fintech and technology to play a bigger role in the economy.
Okay, what can we improve to increasing the financial technology users here?
Absolutely, and I think the way that's going to happen is, and we're already seeing it happen, you need more penetration and the ability to connect to some of the smaller islands, and there are different technologies for that. There are companies we're talking to that are going to use satellites to get to the smaller islands, and that's a great thing if it happens. So it's about two things. It's about access and it's about affordability. And both those can only happen when you have competition coming in. So there is already a good amount of competition in the country, but we believe increasing it and having the right policies to encourage people to go to the smaller islands is going to significantly increase access.
Okay, we'll talk about the policies later, but if we're talking about technology, we talk also about the trust. You know, according to World Bank in 2014, World Bank released data that only 36% or 90 million Indonesian have bank account in traditional banks. And you know, we can see the buildings, we can see the people, and we don't really trust to save our money in traditional bank. How do you can build the trust for Indonesian to use this kind of technology?
So I think firstly, the whole paradigm that you need a bank account to do financial transactions is gone.
Okay.
You don't need a bank account. You need a phone today, in my view. So that's one. Second is, what we need is, so there's a lot of push towards technology, but there are a few other things that need to be done. And one is to improve financial literacy, for people to understand what risks they're getting into, what are the consequences of certain actions they take when they borrow money, things like that. So you need to get financial literacy to also step up, and we've started doing that in some markets, and we will consider doing it here as well. So that's one. The second aspect is you need to have much better regulatory bodies. Now that's a challenge, because you don't want to over-regulate and stifle innovation and creativity, but you don't want to under-regulate and have all kinds of things happening that could result in losses. What I believe is we will make mistakes as we go along, but as long as we learn from those mistakes and we collaborate and we learn from what's happening in other markets, I think we can have a win-win solution.
What is the best regulation for Indonesia market?
So there is no best regulation. What we're doing in Singapore is actually relevant for Indonesia, because the Indonesian regulator is engaged,
so you can
Indonesian banks.
Here.
So no, we've created a sandbox in Singapore where all the ASEAN countries are experimenting. So whatever they learn from there, they can then implement here. And I know the country is also looking at a few things, the cybersecurity law and things like that on a standalone basis. So it's going to be a combination, but the critical thing here that I want to emphasize is the importance of learning from what other markets are doing and sharing knowledge and information, and that's the sort of role that the World Bank Group and IFC are going to play.
Okay, so what are the risks for the financial technology if you compare to the traditional banks?
So I think the biggest risk that we all talk about is cybersecurity.
Okay.
Cybersecurity, data theft, data protection, these are the 3 or 4 big areas that we need to focus on. And I think there is a lot of work going on. We've seen a lot of accidents that have happened in this space in the past, and I think hopefully we're all learning from that. But it's also about keeping up with, you have a new product, you have a new way of doing something, you need to analyze what are the risks there and work on it at the same time. So it's a challenge for everybody, not only Indonesia, trust me, it's a challenge for every regulator, for every financial sector. But so far, I think it's worked pretty well. So I just want to emphasize, people think fintech is the solution to everything. It is to some extent, but there are a lot of risks that come in. The importance of financial literacy that I talked about earlier is important, because if you can access credit on your phone, it's really easy.
Right.
So you need to have a system that monitors the credit you're taking, a centralized credit bureau, linking that to borrowers. So those are the kind of things that also need to be worked on.
Okay. Do you think Indonesia has already the technology infrastructure to expand the financial inclusion here in Indonesia?
I think, if you look at internet penetration in Indonesia, it still has some way to go. And affordability can come down. So I think the government has taken cognizance of that. They are aware, and they are working on it. We at the World Bank Grup are also working with the government on how do you increase access. And the challenge that Indonesia has, that it has more than 17,000 islands. And it takes 8 hours to fly from one end of Indonesia to another end. I mean, that's a huge territory to cover.
Right.
So the question is, how do you get access to some of the smaller islands at an affordable price? And I think that is really critical there.
Okay, so financial technology is growing very fast in the world, not only Indonesia. Do you think fintech will kill traditional banks?
So I'll tell you, in 1969, when the first ATM came out, people said that's the end of a teller in a bank. Tellers still exist today in many banks, but they're doing a different job. They started cross-selling. So I think clearly technology and fintech has eaten into some of the market share of banks in some areas. And let me just take you through what fintech does, or what is needed. So one is clearly the price of delivery. I'm told that a transaction through a cell phone or fintech is 1/3 or 1/4 cheaper than through a bricks and mortar bank. So clearly the cost is much lower. Second is, thanks to technology today, what fintech companies are doing, they're assessing credit risk very differently. Credit risk is being assessed. You have a lot of new algorithms where they assess your credit risk on non-traditional ways. What social networking sites the spending patterns, a plethora of ways to look at credit risk that you didn't have before. So that's something which we should talk about. Third is slightly different, but what's critical is the need to train people. So if you're a microfinance borrower today, you get a loan, but if you want to grow your business, you need to be trained. How do you prepare a business plan? How do you prepare financially audited statements, et cetera, et cetera? And I believe that can also be done through cell phones, through online teaching platforms.
So if we talk about the strategic for expanding the role and value of fintech to financial inclusion in Indonesia, what can we do?
So I think the first thing is to, like I said earlier, to increase penetration and reduce the cost of access to digital, to the internet. 3G, 4G, hopefully one day 5G. That's a prerequisite in my view. Second is, you need to be able to attract investors, and Indonesia already has a number of fintech companies. There are a lot of global companies that are already here, many more will come. So it's about competition. At the end of the day, it's about creating an ecosystem that works, an ecosystem that comprises of the government and regulators, an ecosystem that comprises of financial institutions, an ecosystem that comprises of digital and technology companies, and all of them will then create an ecosystem of entrepreneurship. And that's what will ultimately lead to higher financial inclusion.
All right. Bank Indonesia is targeting financial inclusion level in 2019 will be at 75% level. If we compare to 2015, was only 39%. Do you see that this number is achievable?
I'm an optimist, so I think it's achievable, but things have to be done. And the fundamental difference is 5 or 7 years ago, the only way you could get financial inclusion is if you had a bricks and mortar branch. And someone would have to go to that branch, open a bank account, and that's how you could achieve financial inclusion. Today, I keep coming back to my favorite toy, as I call it. You don't need a bank.
All right.
People can borrow money, remit money, spend money, do everything without actually having a bank account. So if you look at that, and therefore the cost has come down, you don't need to go to every village to set up a bricks and mortar bank branch. You can do that through the cell phone today.
Okay. How do you see financial technology in the next 5 years, Indonesia and of course in the maybe in the world?
I really wish I knew where we'll be 5 years from now. I can't predict that far, because whatever I predict, I suspect I'm going to get it wrong. But I think the one thing that I can predict with a fair amount of uncertainty is that technology is going to play a critical role in all aspects of our life, just not financial markets or financial aspects, but in manufacturing and services and the way we do things. I can already see my 8-year-old daughter behaving so differently than what I did when I was at that age. So technology is going to play a critical role. I think we're going to see a world that's very different 5-7 years from now, and technology is going to be at the core or the center of that.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Vivek.